the political side of it, and then there's the real story.
There's a lot to unpack right there. Wasn't quite the interview I thought that was going to be.
There's a reason for it.
This will be officially my favorite podcast I've ever done.
For people who don't know your success, they're going to learn about it. If they haven't known about your success, they should go down the rabbit hole. I've already been down that rabbit hole because I actually at one point was short Peloton. So I just got down the rabbit hole with you a long time ago. So I'm a huge believer in a person having a coach. And I'm going to tie this back in because you were a coach, and that's what led to SoulCycle. You were coaching people on the bike, and they were coming to you for their own version of therapy, whether it was physical therapy or just the idea of connection with you, et cetera. Yeah, I wanted to transition to, I believe it was 2009 when you left SoulCycle?
Yes, that's correct.
So I'm just curious as to, you're a big owner of the company, and the company goes on to like file with the SEC to raise $100 million. You're a shareholder. What happens to your equity? Did you just hang on to your equity? Because it went on to pretty big success. I mean, it really had a cult following. I don't know if that's the right word, but it really had a loyal following. And really, if you knew it on the East Coast, you kind of had to kind of know it. You guys didn't really advertise, so you were. It reminded me of the most organic way of it developing, which is people that kind of fell in love with it. But I was curious as to what happened with your equity.
Without going into detail about any of the, financial arrangements / decisions that were made upon my leaving. However, so many people, Todd, ask me, I don't understand. I mean, the company exploded before you left. Why would you leave a successful company? And the very simple answer to that is, I didn't leave by choice.
Got it. Makes sense. Well, the reason I ask is I founded a company called Patient Safety in 2004, and that company went on to be sold to Stryker for $120 million, all cash deal. It was a sponge that you could read into the sterile field and prevent it from being left behind in the body for surgery. And I had a lot of people think, well, okay, you sold it for $120 million, you were the founder. And I'm like, yeah, it was supposed to take $2 million in 2 years. It was like $18 million in 9 years, and there was a bunch of iterations of it, and by the time I'm diluted down, it wasn't as lucrative as you all think, right? And that's sort of the story of giving birth to a business, and I wondered if that was the same experience for you, because you did found a very successful business. I wondered if you could give, you don't have to go into specifics, but like, what does a person's mindset have to be like if they're going to start something and they're going to start with partners? Because I had heard, I'd read a little bit that maybe you were pushed out or maybe you didn't leave by choice, but I don't know the specifics and I don't need to know them. It's not really the relevancy, but it is part of relevant to where, I run this program called Risk On, which the R in Risk On is for relationships, and you took on partners, and people don't realize how easy it is to get into a partnership, right? It takes 5 minutes to get married and a lifetime to get divorced. I wondered, what's your perspective after that happening that you would do differently when it comes to how you set SoulCycle up?
Oh my God. There's so much to say. Leaving SoulCycle is something I classify as a trauma in my life. It was extremely devastating. It felt like I was blindsided. I never would have predicted in a million years that it would happen in the way it did. I was approached by one of my co-founders initially. She had an interest in starting a business that was boutique, specifically about spin, teaching spin classes. She knew nothing about teaching a spin class. She had taken a lot of my classes and asked me if I would be the face of the business and, teach my method, basically a method that I had honed over the previous 5 years when I was teaching at a club called the Reebok Club in New York that is now an Equinox, actually. And believe me, I said sure, because it was a dream of mine, but I didn't have the capital to do it. The third partner was one of my closest friends, and she and I used to kind of fantasize about opening a spin business because she loved taking spin class as well. And so I felt guilty that Elizabeth had approached me. Elizabeth didn't know Julie, and so I asked Elizabeth if she'd be open to meeting Julie. And I thought that Julie could bring some interesting assets to the business. She was from LA. She was a talent agent. She had some good connections. She was good at marketing and PR, and she had a good eye for things. And anyway, they met and they got along, and that became, and then it became the three of us, and the three of us co-founded the company. With all of that being said, as I tell you this, I think it probably makes it even harder to fathom that I could end up no longer an owner of the company. However, it did happen. And in terms of what I would do differently, let's get back to how this whole conversation started, which was all about therapy. I had been in therapy during this process, before, during, and after. However, as we well know, therapy is a process, and it takes a long time to really learn about yourself and why you behave in the way you do, why you are the way you are, who your parents really were, all of the above. And so in retrospect, as I got distance from the whole experience, I was able to look back and kind of figure out how I ended up with those two women as partners when in fact they really weren't the right partners for me. And honestly, and I don't think this will surprise you, Todd, I learned that a lot of it had to do with, the role models I had in my parents and their relationship, my relationship with them. I grew up with an extremely narcissistic mother where there was no room for me. It was all about her. And let's just leave it as a lot of similarities to that dynamic were recreated in this partnership. Again, in retrospect, I should have seen the writing on the wall that it was heading in this direction, but I had no idea. I never fathomed it could happen. And again, learning about why I chose the people I chose in my life and the relationships and the failed marriage. I mean, all of it, I was able to kind of glean, if you will, a better understanding of what I will look for moving forward in any future partnership.
Mm. Yeah, that I could imagine how brutal that would be if something that you wanted to do and you talked to your friend about it and created a partnership would end. I mean, I don't know if that would be maybe as traumatic as getting a divorce, maybe worse, right?
100%. It just felt like a betrayal. So
right.
That's kind of hard.
Wow. Yeah. I wonder.
I was just going to say, especially when you're the one kind of bringing 5 years of experience and knowing, learning and knowing what your customer wants, what your customer needs, and then really being ready, in 2006 to open those doors and feel confident that almost my entire following left this beautiful full service gym to literally go to a hole in the wall where we didn't even have a shower, and we're asking them to pay money for one spin class, a lot of money at that time. And by the way, there wasn't a second thought. They were all there waiting for the doors to open.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in New York. I still have an office there, a business there. And I had known people from probably 2004. I think it started in 2006. So I'd probably known people by 2006, 7 that were just attending a few classes. And it was like this sort of unknown. It wasn't SoulCycle. It was SoulCycle, but it wasn't what we know today as this sort of like, this movement that happened at the time. But it's fun. I kind of want to hear about that part of when you're decided to start it to 2009 before you left. Forget the part about the drama of you leaving. But when you're in the business, like, what are you looking at? Are you charting, what are my sales every day? How many people are attending my classes? That seems like Captain Obvious stuff. But like, can you remember the key data points that you were looking at? Like, knowing you're building this business, what did you look at on a regular basis, weekly, daily? What was kind of going through your mind as to how you judge whether it was successful or not?
It was pretty simple. It was solely, no pun intended, about how many people came to class. And we, obviously tracked that every class, every day. And the fact that, and it wasn't immediate, but gradually the classes were getting bigger, the numbers were increasing. We knew that was obviously a really good sign. Touching upon one thing you mentioned, our success in the beginning was entirely word of mouth, as you had pointed out. We never advertised. I mean, in addition to word of mouth, it was just about, throwing some press packets together and handing them out to as many, at that time, magazine editors that we knew to kind of get the word out. And then word of mouth happened slowly but surely. And then we started getting written about in newspapers and magazines. And the word started getting out that SoulCycle was this great place to go where you can work out physically and mentally. And it was those two components that really intrigued people and brought people in. It ended up being therapy on a bike. We didn't call it that, but everyone else did. To the point, Todd, where I had met with therapists, friends who were therapists, who literally had patients that were saying to them, we don't feel like we need to go anymore because we have SoulCycle now.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's crazy. I know you have twin girls. How old are they now?
33.
Wow, I'm losing track of time.
I'm a grandmother, Todd.
No way, really? Wow, congratulations. I did not know that.
Thank you.
Wow.
It's awesome.
Wow. It's a funny thing. You started another company after you left. How quickly did you start it after you left?
Very quickly. I left in, the end of the summer of 2009, and we started working on it in the fall of 2009 in November, and we opened our first studio in 2010, beginning of February.
You leave in 2009 or so, and you're going to launch a Flywheel. You get approached by these private equity people that are taking your classes. You're going to attach metrics to it, which is awesome. And so for people out there learning about business, you have to know how you're going to differentiate yourself. So clearly, she's done that. She's figured out, okay, I'm going to make this different. And so you get started. Talk to us about that growth. And I wanted you to look back a little bit and say, well, what was it like? Because you're not competing against the company that you founded. I would think that would be incredibly hard because one was your baby, and now you're not part of it. And at the same time, you're like, I can tell you're driven, so I'm going to kick ass. So what's in your head right then?
So you're asking these questions does remind me of how so many people approached me when we started Flywheel and said, I don't understand. How did you have the wherewithal to, kind of pull yourself up after that experience and start another one? And I would always have the same instant answer, which was, how could I not? This is what I do. This was the concept I brought to SoulCycle, and suddenly I'm not doing it anymore. How could I not do it again in some form?
Sure.
Keep in mind, I also, I'm a single mom now with twin daughters in high school, and I got to figure something out. And at this point, after experiencing the success at SoulCycle and, starting to make some money, the thought of going back to a big box gym as just an instructor was just not palatable to me. And so this was a really viable option, once I was approached by my two co-founders at that time. And so again, I couldn't imagine not doing it. Yes, it was strange to compete with a business I started. And what was so odd to me was, as we were going along, the people at SoulCycle were not very happy about the fact that I went ahead and started another business.
What did they expect you to do? What?
Unclear. So we would hear back, things being said that where I was accused of copying them, and I would sit there and scratch my head and I would say, how could I copy a business that came from me? It just was very confusing and strange. But again, I had no choice.
Well, it's like accusing Steve Jobs of leaving Apple and then starting a computer company. Hello. That's what he does.
Exactly. So I needed to, make a huge effort, and it was hard to kind of tune out any negativity and just.
So they didn't lock you down. They didn't lock you down with like an anti-compete. We're going to pay you to go away for a while, because the smartest business people would say, well, she helped start this. What do we think she's going to do? So they kind of wrote you off, basically saying, well, she's going to go back to being an instructor. She's not going to have the balls to go start a competitive business against us. I presume that's your thesis here?
I presume so. I guess that makes sense. I've actually heard, many interviews that they've done where they, kind of try to talk about what happened, and they literally do use the words, well, at the end of the day, she was just an instructor.
Wow.
Yeah. So maybe you're right.
Try to rewrite a little history, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that kind of thing before. Obviously, you weren't just an instructor. But you got this motivation, you start a second one, and can lightning strike a second time. Talk to us about the growth of Flywheel.
Yes. So as I said, we started in 2010, and there are certain advantages to being second in market, which I learned. And one of them is, some of the work was done with SoulCycle in terms of getting the word out. And people are now in New York are aware of this spin thing. However, with that, we opened in a neighborhood that pretty much had nothing going on in the Flatiron district. It's ironic that the Flatiron area became the hub of fitness and fitness businesses in New York. However, it was good for us, again, because it was untapped at the time. So we had a whole new breed of people coming in and trying spin classes. So we probably sold out our first class within a month, which, did not happen at Soul because it obviously took more time to get the word out there. So once we sold out our first class, we were rolling, and we started getting successful pretty quickly, and the business grew really quickly. And by 2012, 2 years later, we started to be approached by other people who were interested in buying the business. We weren't ready to sell at that point. We did take on a strategic investor who had come and taken class with his family and just fell in love with the business. So that was a great growth point. And 2 years after that, that strategic investor bought our company.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was great.
How did SoulCycle, I guess I don't follow the chain of things that happen here. It doesn't go public. How does it end up in the hands of Stephen Ross? I don't understand that part.
This was all a time period where I was no longer there, so I can't give you too much information on that. I just know that the S1 was written up, and the road shows happened for them to go public, but it never quite went in that direction.
Right, but you were at Reebok Studios, which ended up being an Equinox product, but now Equinox owns SoulCycle, so I just wonder if there's...
total coincidence, but yes.
Oh, just a coincidence.
Yeah.
So
totally.
Flywheel gets sold, and...
Flywheel gets sold. My two co-founders are out. Part of the deal was for me to stay. which I did. It was, as also happens when there are acquisitions, it was very hard. It was really hard to have an entirely new leadership team that came, from a more corporate background. When a business like Flywheel and SoulCycle were birthed from a very personal place and very, hands-on in terms of how we reacted with our clients as well as our employees. And it changed a lot when there was that huge growth spurt with both SoulCycle and Flywheel. And it was hard for me. I won't lie. The people in charge were not familiar with the fitness business. And so unfortunately, a lot of wrong decisions were made. And I was no longer the person with the final decision on things. And so things changed. And the focus eventually became starting an at-home bike. We were approached by John Foley, the founder of Peloton, before Peloton started. We were approached by John to do an at-home bike together because he wanted to model his business after Flywheel, after our leaderboards, after our competition themes in some of the classes. And at the time, our strategic investor said, no, we'll do it ourselves if we want to do an at-home bike. Well, yikes. So no one really bought a Flywheel at-home bike, and then Peloton happened and exploded. Obviously the pandemic was a huge, unfortunately, a huge opportunity for Peloton. Unfortunate in that it was an unfortunate, obviously, happening, to say the least. But, their company, obviously, their product was needed, and their business exploded. And it was, again, another tough moment, because there's the Flywheel concept, but now it's Peloton. And I'm not a part of that.
What are the for those people out there thinking about the fitness industry, in your experience, what were the margins like? Because you said your two partners from private equity looked at the margins. What were they like? So you had a studio. Did you have to have scale to have more than one studio for the margins to work, or did it work across one store? Did one store, could you operate basically a model where you had one store, or was the model happy?
I mean, obviously, Todd, at the end of the day, it depends on what your goals are financially, how much money you want to make. I think that you can do well with one studio. I'm not going to go into numbers, but you could do well. However, scaling is the natural way to go. That being said, the real question, and I asked myself the question today, is how far do you scale? How many studios do you open? Because there is a point where the most beautiful things and appealing things about these businesses get lost when it gets too diluted and priorities change. And look, let's call a spade. When you're constantly scaling because the goal is making as much money as possible, then by definition, parts of the business are going to fall to the wayside. And that's what's happened with all of them. It really has. It started to happen with Flywheel. It definitely happened with SoulCycle. I mean, if you look at what's happened to SoulCycle now, it's just, they closed half their studios in this country. Pandemic obviously had something to do with the fitness industry generally, for sure, but it was more than the pandemic. Things change when you scale too much in this kind of business.
Yeah, I kind of wondered about the fitness industry. Not that I'm not that I'm a picture of fitness myself, but if you look at the old club model, like the Bally's Fitnesses that were around before, and now Equinox, which was like really high end, pretty expensive to be part of Equinox. What's everlasting in that space? You know what I mean? Do you remember there was I don't know your exact age, but Remember, they used to have Reebok step classes, where you have these little platforms you'd step on, and then there was.
Oh, I used to teach step classes in the 80s.
Well, there you go, right? So, what's happening in fitness now? Like, what is the thing that you're paying attention to the most in it now?
As I said, I am really right now trying to figure it out. The fitness industry in general is grappling right now, and everybody's trying to figure it out. Things have changed. The days, let's say, of when I opened SoulCycle and Flywheel, to take that for an example, people were spinning 6 days a week. People were sometimes taking 2 classes a day. Therein lied the success and the business. That's all changed. The idea of just going to one genre of fitness is over.
Is that the whole like Orange Theory or berries? Like out here, there's something called Orange Theory. There's also berries, and there's also
Orange Theory and berries are more kind of Army boot camp style classes, HIIT training, and all viable classes. But what I'm saying is, the trends changed. And so instead of doing the same thing every day, people are now mixing it up, which is a good thing. I mean, it's not necessarily great to put your body through the same routine 6 days a week. So now people are changing it up, and they're doing some stretch classes, some yoga, some berries, some spin, a little bit of everything. But in addition to that, with the pandemic, people got used to working out digitally, online, in the comfort of their home. And so now that we're moving out of the pandemic, people are doing both. It's more hybrid now. So people are taking a couple days and working out online, and then maybe a couple days to go to a studio. So that changes the numbers drastically as well. So because we're still kind of coming out of all of this, I don't think anyone has the answer yet.
What are you doing now?
I was hired about a year and a half ago by a company called F45. It's a group fitness franchise company that started in Australia. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And I was brought on to head up 2 new concepts that were, again, group fitness classes specifically focused to the baby boomer generation. During the last year and a half, without going into detail, a lot of changes occurred at the company. And so everything kind of shifted, and they're kind of restructuring right now. I'm still there, but we're kind of all figuring out what's going to be next. I am very interested in the baby boomer generation, probably because I am of that generation, and so I know it really well. And in certain ways, I'm thinking about moving retroactively because I think things do work in circles, and I think people are missing kind of what I was talking about before, the personal touch that kind of fell by the wayside when everything expanded so greatly. So I'm thinking more in that direction, personal touch. Really, actually, going back to the beginning of this podcast, focusing on mental health as much as physical health. The need is so there. And I don't have to go over, what we read every day in the news in terms of, how people suffered during the pandemic, social media effects, suicides. I mean, they're just, a multitude of reasons to teach everyone about the importance of mental health. And I can't think of physical fitness and physical health without adding the mental health component.
I probably watch too much TikTok and Instagram to realize how dysfunctional people can be, and how much either in marriage or in mental health that we have went so far to one spectrum of even belief systems. I mean, you and I probably are similar of age, it sounds like. I remember growing up in the 80s, very young in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, graduated in 1988. I don't remember everybody hating each other on one side or the other. It was never like this so tribal, scenario here. But here's this is going to be like a weird connection. You're going to say, Todd, either you lost your mind or I'm with you. All right.
I'm ready.
So I'm watching a reboot of Sex and the City. I happen to be in touch with my feminine side and happen to love the show. Loved it forever. And the guy, what's his name? Big, they're married finally, which is what everyone probably wanted to have happen. He gets on a a Peloton. And he knows the instructor he's going to see, and he goes and he has a heart attack and dies. So at that moment, they killed that show and they killed probably Peloton for a little bit too. I wondered, since you grew up in New York and you know that program, I know you know it. I know you and I've watched it. Come on. You probably know a lot of those. Right. And it's a sort of if you grow up and spend any time in New York, and I have, it's sort of like, in fact, one time my friend's restaurant was featured in Sex and the City. So like I love the show. But I was curious about your thoughts on that episode, because I'm so pissed I won't watch another one again. I'm so pissed that they killed off Big. I mean, maybe that was their goal, but in terms of getting publicity. But are you suggesting that the actual relationship with the instructor is lost again? Are you suggesting that needs to be part of the component of going to a place, and maybe your therapy is that person, you're training with that person, you feel good about that person kind of knows you?
I think what happened was, there's certainly, some amazing instructors that came out of SoulCycle and Flywheel and Peloton, and I am sure they still have their followings. But I think what I know happened, which might have had a big influence, was the concept of the spin instructor, being influential in your life, in the rider's life, and therapizing them and helping them feel stronger emotionally every day was a fantastic thing. But it started, it started to get parodied, and it started to get made fun of because it just went too far, if you really want my opinion. I know that when I would teach, and many other instructors that I know personally who are great instructors, everything we said was authentic. It came from an experience that I had or they had. And so we could speak to something because we went through it. But then what happens is, for an example, the instructors, let's say, are getting younger and younger. So I noticed this a lot. So let's say you have a rider in the class who's 53 years old, and she has a 22-year-old instructor who is advising her how to live her life. It doesn't work. And so it kind of became a cliche, and it became laughable in certain ways. I don't know, Todd, did you see the SNL spoofs on spinning?
I did.
Okay.
Because I was too lazy. Never again. Let's ride.
May I have this dance? Look, this moment is so much more than us and our beautiful bodies. This morning I Googled racism, and guess what? It bummed me out. And then I Googled gay racism, and that was even worse. So you know what I did? I flushed my computer down the toilet because I don't need that negativity in my life. Let's ride!
So there you have it.
Right.
I think it really served to, be a detriment to what these businesses were about and the goodness that they started with.
What did you think about your book experience, Riding High? I always think I have a book coming out in November called Risk On: 7 Ways to Build a $1 Billion Career. I wrote it right after my company went public on the NASDAQ, and I'm curious as to, was it therapy to write it, and what was the experience like?
It was very cathartic to write it. I had been, it had been suggested to me for years that I should write a book, and I never really took it seriously. Again, part of my MO, and, not realizing that I had a lot to say. And one day someone gave me a very convincing reason in that he took my hand and literally took me to a literary agent who said, tell me your story. I told him the story and I had a contract that night in my inbox, which was amazing. And I felt that it was a story that needed to be told. I had so many learning lessons in it that I learned about my life and business at the same time, which is why I call the book a memoir/business book, because I was someone who never went to business school, didn't think I knew anything about business. However, I was able to start 2 businesses and run 2 businesses. So obviously I learned an enormous amount, and a lot of the learnings just came from life in general. And it allowed me to be successful. And so I wanted to talk about all of those lessons I learned through my life, a lot of them through therapy, a lot of them through trauma, a lot of them through mistakes I made, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I run a platform called Risk on 360, a global success network. And we're actually been around for a year, but we're launching again in November. We'll have a second conference. And what we do is we make available, different categories like personal wellness, relationships, personal finance. And we bring people into the category that I either think would be helpful for people or they've had a experience that they can share with people. It's a fairly growing community. I'd love to talk to you about that. That's something hopefully
Awesome.
I can chat with you at Phuket's maybe. Maybe we could grab a bite or something there.
That'd be great.
Listen, I appreciate you being here. I could go on for a long time about the experience of therapy and leaving of SoulCycle and the idea of being a single mom like my mom was for such a long period of time, or growing up with a narcissistic parent. That's a whole different category. But I'd love to have you back again, or maybe be on a panel if you could, because I think your story's fun.
I'd love it.
Is the book still produced, or what's the status of the book?
It is still produced. I, definitely when the pandemic hit, the speaking engagements lessened for sure. I've had a few recently, so hopefully they'll come back and I can promote the book. But to be honest with you, obviously I'd never had the experience of writing a book, and boy, did I learn a lot about how much effort you have to put into promoting your own book. And I will tell you, I didn't really do it.
No? And
that's not to say I can't pick it up and try and do it again and do it, in a real way, which who knows, maybe it's something I will do at some point. The story doesn't really get old and a lot of people can relate to it. So we'll see.
No, I have 2 daughters. I think the idea of promoting women being successful and having a family, or being single and having a family, or having a strong, dominant mom that maybe wasn't the ideal situation, those are all stories that can be really helpful for people. And I find that, the funny thing for me is I have some real haters out there, but I press on really hard, so I really don't pay a lot of attention to them. And I got people who care about what I'm doing. But I notice that people are inspired by what happened in what you consider to be a failure, or how does the failure turn into a success. And I think that your story is really powerful. That's why I was drawn to it. I think that, listen, from personal preference, I hope you keep telling it. I'm sure there's a chapter 3. If there was SoulCycle and there was Flywheel, there's a chapter 3. I don't know what that chapter 3 is, right? Or is it an act 3? Right. Or there's an act 3. I can feel something coming. I don't know what it is. Because you're thinking. I agree. You're thinking about it.
Yes, I am.
Okay, Ruth. Well, that was fun. There's never enough time. We're going to do this again. I myself have not been on a SoulCycle, although I've used a million exercise bikes, and I haven't been on a Flywheel. But I love the idea about the technology. Really, it's really fun to interview people that created an industry, and that's what you've done. And we appreciate your time, and I want to learn more about your story. We'll catch up with you soon again, okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye, Ruth.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
There's a reason for it. did get
Yeah,
that
you
right.
got
I
it
want to hear
right.
the story.